What if one day you lost everything? No money, no power, no name that opens doors. Would the person you love still stay? Or would they disappear the moment the comfort is gone? Ethan Cole had everything most people spend their entire lives chasing. Money wasn't just something he had. It was something that followed him everywhere. Luxury cars, private elevators, people who smiled too fast. But none of it answered the one question that kept him awake at night. So he made a choice. He walked away from it all and became a delivery driver. No one noticed. Now the question was simple. Would he tell the truth or keep testing the only thing he had left? Love? Character notes: Ethan Cole. Main character. Ethan Cole was not an ordinary man. He was the kind of man people noticed before they even understood why. He did not need to speak loudly. He did not need to chase attention. He carried the kind of calm power that made other people shift in their seats and straighten their backs when he entered a room. In New York, his name moved through business circles with weight. Investors trusted him. Competitors watched him. Employees respected him. Even people who disliked him admitted one thing: Ethan Cole was sharp, disciplined, and almost impossible to outplay. He built his reputation young, and he built it fast. By the time most men his age were still trying to prove themselves, Ethan had already founded companies, bought struggling ones, and turned them around, and made more money than he ever imagined needing. He understood numbers. He understood timing. He understood people. He knew when to push, when to stay silent, when to walk away, and when to make the kind of move that changed the room in one sentence. Control was his language. He controlled meetings. He controlled negotiations. He controlled his public image. He controlled his temper, even when others lost theirs. That was one of the things people admired most about him. He was strong without being loud. He was confident without acting wild. He was never the man throwing a glass in anger or trying to dominate a room with noise. No, Ethan was more dangerous than that. He was the kind of man who could end a conversation with one look and make it clear he had already decided what would happen next. But for all the things Ethan could control, there was one part of his life that kept slipping through his hands. Love it. That was where his strength ended and his doubt began. People assumed a man like Ethan had everything. They were not completely wrong. He had wealth beyond comfort. He had a penthouse with walls of glass overlooking the city. He had a vacation house in Martha's Vineyard. He had a black car waiting whenever he needed it. He had tailored suits, a private gym, a wine cellar he barely touched, and a schedule built to the minute. His life looked polished from the outside, the kind of life people point to and say, he made it. But there was something missing, and Ethan felt it most at night. After the calls ended, after the meetings were done, after the city turned quiet beneath him, he would sit alone in his living room, with the skyline glowing beyond the windows, and feel a kind of emptiness he could never explain to anyone. The strange thing was, he was not lonely because he lacked company. Women were always around him, at charity dinners, rooftop events, gallery openings, board celebrations, private lounges. There was always someone smiling at him, for a second too long, someone laughing too quickly at a joke that was not even funny, someone asking harmless questions in a voice that was too careful, too soft, too practiced. At first, Ethan wanted to believe some of them were real. He truly did. There was a time when he still gave people the benefit of the doubt. There was a time when he thought maybe one woman among all of them might care less about his money and more about the man carrying it. But over the years, he began to notice the same pattern repeating itself with painful consistency. Before they asked what made him happy, they asked what he drove. Before they asked what kind of life he wanted, they asked what neighborhood he lived in. Before they asked how he was feeling, they asked how many companies he owned. It was never direct at first. That was what made it worse. It came disguised as curiosity, disguised as admiration, disguised as interest. But Ethan had heard enough versions of it to recognize the shape of it almost immediately. Money first, everything else after. Sometimes a woman would seem warm, patient, even thoughtful for a while, and then sooner or later the request would come. Not always something huge. Sometimes it was subtle. Help me connect with someone. Help me get a position. Help my brother with his startup. Lend me this. Introduce me to that. Do something small that would prove what he already suspected. They did not want Ethan. They wanted access. They wanted relief. They wanted the doors that opened because he was standing there. Ethan never made a scene about it. He never embarrassed anyone. He would sit there with that same calm face and listen. He would answer politely when needed. He would leave quietly when he had seen enough. But each time it happened, something inside him hardened a little more. Not into cruelty, not into bitterness exactly, more like cold disappointment, the kind that settles deep in a man after too many repetitions of the same wound. He was tired of being admired and not known, tired of being useful and not loved, tired of wondering whether anyone would stay if all the polished parts of his life disappeared. The more successful he became, the less certain he felt about the motives of the people around him. That was the cruel joke of wealth. It solved many problems, but created a different kind of fear. The fear that every smile had a price. The fear that affection could be rented. The fear that sincerity had become impossible to recognize. Ethan did not talk about that fear, because men like him were not expected to speak that way. People assumed rich men had no right to question love. If a beautiful woman wanted to be around you, then what exactly was the problem? But Ethan knew the problem. The problem was that he could no longer tell where interest ended and truth began. Some nights he would stand in front of the mirror after taking off his watch, his jacket, his polished public self, and ask himself the question that had started haunting him more and more with time. Who is actually loving me? Not the version in magazines, not the man on stage at conferences, not the name signed on contracts. If all of this vanished tomorrow, who would still look at me? The gamwe. That question followed him everywhere. It followed him through meetings, through dinners, through handshakes, through quiet elevator rides back up to his penthouse. He kept functioning. He kept winning. He kept looking like a man, completely in command, but deep inside, he was standing at the edge of a truth he could no longer avoid, because for the first time in years, Ethan Cole was beginning to realize that a man can own half the world and still have no peace if he does not know whether one heart in front of him is real. And that realization was about to push him toward a decision that would change everything. Ethan Cole lived above the city, not just in status, but in distance. His penthouse sat on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, where the skyline stretched like a painting beneath his feet. Floor-to-ceiling windows surrounded his living space, letting in light during the day and turning the entire apartment into a quiet sea of reflections at night. Everything inside was clean, precise, controlled. A long marble kitchen island untouched most days, a living room arranged like a magazine cover, soft leather furniture that almost no one sat on, a dining table built for 10 that rarely saw more than 2. His bedroom faced the river, where the lights shimmered like something alive. But even that view lost its meaning after a while, because no matter how beautiful a place looks, it cannot fill a space inside a man. Ethan owned cars most people only saw online, a black Bentley for formal events, a matte gray Range Rover for the city, a low-profile electric car he drove when he wanted to move without being noticed. And still he often chose to sit in the back seat instead of driving himself. Not because he could not, but because even his time was structured, managed, optimized. His life ran like a system. Everything had a place. Every hour had a purpose. His calendar was booked weeks in advance. Meetings, dinners, events, deals. Each day was a sequence of movements that looked effortless from the outside, but required constant attention behind the scenes. At night, he attended events that looked like scenes from another world. Rooftop gatherings with soft music and quiet laughter. Charity galas filled with people in tailored suits and polished dresses. Private lounges where conversations sounded important even when they were empty. The lighting was always perfect. The drinks were always expensive. The smiles were always ready, and the attention always found him. Ethan would step into these rooms, and people would notice. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just small shifts. A glance held a second longer. A conversation paused slightly. A woman adjusting her posture as he walked closer. It was subtle, but consistent, the kind of attention that follows power without being invited. At first it felt normal. That was the life he had built, after all. But over time, he began to see something else. Something that made him uncomfortable. There was always a woman nearby. Always one who found a reason to stand close. Always one who laughed at the right moment. Always one who touched his arm lightly, as if it meant nothing. Some approached with confidence, others with softness. Some asked about his work with interest that felt too rehearsed. Some pretended not to know who he was, while somehow knowing exactly how to speak to him. It started the same way almost every time. A compliment, a question, a small connection, then a pause. And then the shift. Ethan had learned to recognize it. Before they asked about his day, they asked about his company. Before they asked what he liked, they asked what he owned. Before they asked who he was, they asked where he lived. It was never blunt. Not at first. That was what made it harder to call out. It came wrapped in charm, wrapped in curiosity, wrapped in interest. But the direction was always the same. Money first, everything else later. He would stand there listening, responding calmly, giving nothing away. His face stayed neutral, his tone steady, but inside something kept pulling back. Just a little more each time. There was one night that stayed with him more than the others. A private dinner in a quiet lounge above the city. The lights were low, the music soft. The kind of place where conversations were meant to feel meaningful. Across the table sat Vanessa Blake. She was beautiful in a way that attracted attention without effort. Sharp features, confident eyes, the kind of smile that knew its own effect. She spoke well. She listened just enough. She leaned forward at the right moments. She called him thoughtful. She called him different. For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to relax. Maybe this one was not the same. Maybe this one saw more than the others. But then it came, like it always did. Not immediately. Not harshly. Just a small shift in tone. A slight pause before the question. Her voice softened just enough to feel intentional. Ethan, you know, I have been thinking about expanding my brand, she said lightly. Maybe you could help me connect with some of your investors. It would really mean a lot. And just like that, the illusion broke again. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Not angry, not surprised. Just tired. He nodded politely. He gave a neutral answer. The conversation continued, as if nothing had changed. But inside him, something closed completely. By the time the night ended, and he returned to his penthouse, the city lights no longer felt impressive. They felt distant, cold, repetitive. He walked through his apartment slowly, past the untouched kitchen, past the silent living room, past the wide windows showing a city that never stopped moving. And he realized something that stayed with him longer than he expected. He was surrounded by everything and still alone. Not alone in the physical sense. Not alone in presence, but alone in truth. No one in that room had seen him. Not really. They had seen what he represented, what he could offer, what he could open for them, but not the man himself. That realization did not come as a shock. It came as a quiet confirmation, the kind that settles in slowly until it becomes impossible to ignore. And as Ethan stood there, looking out over a city full of people he could not trust, he began to understand that if he wanted something real, he might have to leave everything that made his life easy behind. And that thought stayed with him long after the lights went out, leading him closer to a decision he could no longer delay. Ethan did not become cold overnight. It happened slowly, quietly, through repetition, through small moments that looked harmless from the outside, but carried weight inside him. The first few times it happened, he ignored it. He told himself not to judge too quickly, not to assume the worst. People ask questions, that is normal. People are curious. That is normal. But over time, the same pattern began to repeat so clearly that he could no longer pretend not to see it. One evening at a private gallery event in Soho, Ethan found himself standing beside a woman named Vanessa Blake. She was confident, sharp, dressed in a way that balanced elegance and attention. She did not rush to speak. She did not act overly impressed, and that alone made her different from the others. She asked about his thoughts on the artwork. She listened carefully. She responded with intelligence. For a moment, Ethan felt something unfamiliar ease. Maybe this one was not the same. Maybe this time, it would be different. They walked together through the gallery, speaking about small things. Art, travel, ideas, life. Nothing heavy, nothing forced. And then, as always, there was a pause, a shift. Subtle, almost invisible, if you were not paying attention. Vanessa tilted her head slightly and smiled. "You seem like someone who knows the right people," she said lightly, almost as if the thought had just come to her naturally. "I have been trying to get my fashion line in front of serious investors. Maybe you could connect me with a few of your contacts. It would really help me grow." It was not what she said. It was how easily the conversation moved there, how quickly it turned from connection to opportunity. Ethan felt it immediately, the same quiet disappointment he had felt before. He nodded politely, gave a neutral answer, and let the conversation continue. But something inside him stepped back completely again. Later that same week, he attended a business dinner downtown. A long table filled with executives, founders, partners, people who spoke in careful, measured sentences. Across from him sat another woman. She introduced herself as Claire. She was warm, friendly, easy to talk to. She asked about his childhood, which surprised him. Most people skipped that part. She laughed naturally. She made him feel almost normal. For a brief moment, Ethan allowed himself to believe again. Maybe this is what real interest feels like. Not rushed, not calculated, just present. But halfway through the dinner, it came again, disguised as something casual. "So Ethan," Claire said, as she placed her glass down, "I have been thinking about transitioning into venture capital. I feel like I have the instinct for it, but I need the right guidance. Maybe you could mentor me, or even bring me into one of your firms. Just something small to get started." The word small always sounded the same. No matter who said it, small. Help, small favor. Small opportunity. But behind it was always the same expectation. Access. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression calm, his voice steady. "We can talk about it sometime," he said, knowing fully that the conversation had already lost its meaning. By the end of the night, he left early, not because he was tired physically, but because he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Another moment stayed with him more than the others. It happened in a quieter setting, not a public event, not a crowded room, just a private lounge with soft lighting and slow music, the kind of place where conversations were supposed to feel more real. Vanessa was there again, this time closer, more familiar. She sat across from him, her voice softer, her tone more personal. "You know," she said gently, "people think you are hard to read, but I don't think so. I think you are just careful." Ethan watched her, not saying anything. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing lightly against his hand. "You deserve someone who understands you," she added. And for a second, something in him almost believed it. Almost. But then she continued. "I have been struggling a bit lately," she said, her voice lowering just enough to feel intimate. "My lease is ending, and I am trying to move somewhere better, closer to the city. Maybe you could help me out, just temporarily until things settle." It was the same pattern again, wrapped in softer words, wrapped in what sounded like vulnerability. Ethan did not pull his hand away. He did not react sharply. He simply looked at her for a moment longer than usual. Then nodded slowly. "We will see," he said. And that was enough for her. She smiled, leaned back, and the moment passed like it had not changed anything. But it had. Something inside him closed further than before. It was not anger. It was not even surprise. It was recognition, the kind that becomes impossible to ignore once you have seen it too many times. After that night, Ethan began to notice it everywhere, not just in women, but in conversations, in interactions, in the way people approached him, the way they measured his value by what he could give instead of who he was. Sometimes the requests were direct. Sometimes they were hidden behind compliments. Sometimes they came quickly. Sometimes they waited until just the right moment. But they always came, and each time they did, Ethan felt the same quiet shift inside him. A step back, a layer removed, a distance growing between him and the people around him. He stopped expecting anything different. He stopped hoping that the next conversation would be real. He stopped believing that someone might stay, even if he had nothing left. One night, sitting alone in his penthouse, the city glowing beneath him, he replayed the same question in his mind again and again. Maybe this is just how it is. Maybe there is no such thing as love without condition. Maybe everyone is looking for something, and the moment you cannot give it, they leave. He leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the silence settle around him. And for the first time, the thought did not feel dramatic. It felt logical, almost inevitable. There is no real love, not for someone like me. And that thought stayed with him longer than anything else, until it slowly began to shape a decision that would take him out of everything he knew and into a life where no one would see him as Ethan Cole, the billionaire, but just another man trying to get through the day. Ethan did not make the decision. In one moment, it built slowly like pressure behind a wall. Every conversation, every empty smile, every hidden request added weight. Until one night it became too much. He was sitting alone again, the city quiet beneath him, the glass walls reflecting a version of himself he no longer fully recognized. A man in control, a man respected, a man successful, and yet a man who could not answer the simplest question in his life. Who would stay if all of this was gone? He stood up and walked toward the window, his hands in his pockets, his mind turning over the same thought again and again. Maybe the problem is not them. Maybe the problem is this life. Maybe as long as I stand here, as long as I am this version of myself, I will never know the truth. That idea did not feel impulsive. It felt clear, almost uncomfortable, in how simple it was. If he wanted to know who loved him, then he had to remove the reason people stayed, not reduce it. Not hide it partially, but remove it completely. No luxury, no advantage, no signal of wealth, nothing that could influence how people saw him. Just himself alone, in a world that did not care who he used to be. He let out a slow breath, the kind that comes before a real decision. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to certainty, not about the outcome, but about the direction. The next morning, Ethan canceled everything: meetings, calls, events. His assistant was confused, but he gave no explanation. He just said he needed time off, and that was enough. He drove himself that day. No driver, no schedule, just the road and his thoughts. He did not go far, just far enough to feel distance from the version of his life that had become too polished, too predictable, too controlled. By the afternoon, he had already started planning quietly, carefully, the same way he approached business. But this time, it was personal. He would not disappear completely. That would raise questions and risk exposure. Instead, he would step down from visibility, shift into a different identity, something ordinary, something unnoticed. He chose something simple, something real, something that existed everywhere, but was rarely respected. A delivery driver, someone who moved through the city without being seen, someone people depended on, but rarely acknowledged, someone who worked hard and went home unnoticed. It was not random, it was intentional. That role would place him in direct contact with everyday people, not in rooms designed for power, but in streets, homes, buildings, places where conversations were not influenced by status. He would see how people reacted when he had nothing to offer. No connections, no money, no advantage, just presence, just effort, just a man doing his job. That same week, Ethan arranged everything through layers of privacy, his finances secured, his identity protected, his appearance adjusted. He cut back on everything that defined him. The tailored suits replaced with simple work clothes, the expensive watch removed, the polished look softened. He kept his posture, his calm, his discipline, but everything else changed when he looked at himself in the mirror again. This time he saw someone different, not weaker, not less, just stripped down, real. And for the first time, that reflection did not feel distant. It felt honest. He took the job through a local delivery service. Nothing special, nothing high profile. Just another name on the schedule, another driver on the road. No one there knew who he was. No one cared where he came from. To them, he was just Ethan, a new guy trying to make a living. The first morning, he showed up early, standing outside the small warehouse, watching other drivers move in and out, loading packages, talking casually, preparing for the day. No one looked at him twice. No one adjusted their behavior. No one smiled for advantage. It was quiet, normal, unremarkable. And strangely, that felt different than anything he had experienced in years. As he picked up his first set of deliveries and walked toward the van, something inside him shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to feel it. This was it. No more filters. No more controlled environments. No more protection. Just life as it was. And as he closed the door and started the engine, Ethan knew that whatever he was about to find out would not be comfortable, but it would be real. And for the first time, that was all he wanted. Ethan thought he was prepared. He truly did. He had studied the role, understood the system, watched how deliveries worked, how routes were planned, how time was managed. But nothing he learned from observation prepared him for what it actually felt like to live it. His first full day started early, earlier than anything in his old life. No slow mornings, no quiet coffee by the window, no time to think. The warehouse was already alive when he arrived, drivers moving quickly, scanning packages, loading vans, talking in short, direct sentences. No one wasted time. No one stood still. Ethan picked up his scanner, followed instructions, kept his movements simple, precise. He did not speak more than necessary. He did not try to stand out. And for the first time in years, no one cared who he was. Not one person looked at him twice. Not one person adjusted their tone when they spoke to him. He was just another worker, another name on the list, another pair of hands expected to deliver results. That anonymity felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, but also real in a way he had never experienced before. When he stepped into the van and started his route, the city felt different from this level. No longer a skyline to admire, but a series of streets, buildings, doors, addresses, problems to solve. The work itself was simple on the surface. Pick up, deliver, move to the next stop. But the reality was something else. Traffic delays, tight schedules, customers waiting, some patient, some not. The pressure was constant. Every minute mattered. Every delay added weight to the rest of the day. By mid-morning, Ethan had already felt the shift in how people treated him. The first customer barely looked at him, just opened the door, signed quickly, and closed it without a word. The second complained about the delay, even though he was on time. The third made him wait outside for several minutes, then spoke to him like he was the one causing inconvenience. It was not direct insult, not always, but it was clear enough. The tone, the body language, the lack of respect. People spoke past him, not to him. Some did not even say, "Thank you." They just took the package and closed the door as if he was part of the system, not a person inside it. One moment stayed with him more than the others. It was a delivery to a high-rise building not far from where he used to live. He stood in the lobby holding a medium-sized package, waiting for the receptionist to acknowledge him. She glanced at once, then looked back at her screen. He waited another minute, then 2, then 3. Finally, she spoke without looking up. "Leave it there," she said, pointing to a corner. Ethan hesitated just slightly. "I need a signature," he replied calmly. She sighed loudly, as if he had asked for something unreasonable. "Fine," she said, rolling her eyes as she stood up and walked over. She signed quickly, then added next time, "Don't stand there like that, just drop it and go." And Ethan nodded once, said nothing, and left. As he walked out of the building, he caught a glimpse of himself in the glass door, not the version in a suit, not the man people recognized. Just a delivery driver holding an empty scanner, walking back to his van. And in that moment, something hit him harder than anything else that morning. This was how many people were seen, every day, not as individuals, not as stories, not as lives, just as roles, just as functions, just as something to move things from one place to another. By the afternoon, his body felt it too. The weight of the packages, the constant movement, the standing, the driving, the mental tracking of routes and time. It was physical in a way his old life never required. His shoulders tightened, his hands roughened slightly, his focus sharpened, not because he wanted it to, but because he had to. There was no room for distraction, no space for error. Every mistake had a consequence, not in reputation, but in immediate pressure, lost time, missed delivery, frustration from customers. By the end of the day, Ethan returned to the warehouse quieter than when he left, not defeated but changed. His shirt slightly damp, his hands marked with small signs of work, his posture still controlled, but carrying something heavier than before. One of the other drivers looked at him and gave a short nod. "First day?" he asked. Ethan nodded. The man gave a small half-smile. "You will get used to it," he said, then walked away. Just like that, no judgment, no curiosity, no hidden agenda. Just a simple exchange between two people doing the same job. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, letting that sink in. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something real. Not admiration, not pressure, not expectation. Just a simple acknowledgement. He was there. He was working. He was part of something ordinary. And as he drove home that evening, the city no longer looked like a place he owned, but a place he was finally beginning to understand. And that understanding was only just beginning to unfold into something deeper than he had expected. The first few days felt like adjustment, but by the second week, it became something deeper, something Ethan could not ignore anymore. It was no longer just about learning the job. It was about seeing the world from a position he had never stood in before. And once he saw it clearly, he could not unsee it. He began to notice how differently people spoke, depending on who they believed you were. Not just in tone, but in patience, in respect, in basic acknowledgement. When he wore a suit, people listened. When he wore a uniform, people rushed him. When he spoke as Ethan Cole, people paused to understand. When he spoke as a delivery driver, people interrupted, corrected, dismissed. It was not always harsh. Sometimes it was subtle, almost invisible. but the difference was always there. One afternoon, he delivered to an office building in Midtown, the kind of place he used to walk into through the front doors with people greeting him by name. This time, he entered through the service entrance directed by a security guard, who did not look at him twice. "Go around the back deliveries there," the man said without even checking his badge. Ethan nodded, walked around the building carrying a stack of packages heavier than they looked. When he reached the loading dock, he stood there waiting while 2 employees talked casually, ignoring him completely. After several minutes, one of them glanced at him. "What do you need?" he asked. "Without interest. Delivery," Ethan replied, holding up the scanner. The man pointed vaguely. "Leave it there. Someone will get it. No signature, no confirmation, no process, just assumption that his time did not matter." Ethan hesitated only for a second, then placed the boxes where he was told, and walked away as he stepped back onto the street. He remembered how different that same building felt when he entered as a guest. Doors opened immediately. People stood straighter. Voices changed. It was not the building that had changed. It was how they saw him. And that realization stayed with him longer than the moment itself. Another day he delivered to a quiet neighborhood. Older houses, tree-lined streets, the kind of place that looked calm from the outside. He rang the bell and waited. A woman opened the door, looked at him quickly, then at the package. "You are late," she said before he could speak. Ethan checked the time. He was not late. "Traffic delayed me by a few minutes," he said calmly. She sighed as if that explanation meant nothing. "You people always have excuses," she replied, taking the box from his hands and closing the door before he could respond. "You people." The words stayed with him more than anything else that day. Not because they were shouted, not because they were aggressive, but because they were easy for her to say, as if he was not an individual, as if he belonged to a category that deserved less patience, less respect, less understanding. Ethan stood there for a moment longer than necessary, looking at the closed door, then turned and walked back to the van silently. Inside him, something shifted again. Not anger, not reaction, but clarity. This was not about one person. This was about a pattern, about a system of quiet judgments that shaped how people treated each other without even thinking about it. As the days passed, he began to notice something else too. It was not just how people treated him. It was how workers treated each other. At the warehouse, drivers joked, shared tips, helped each other load packages. No one asked about status. No one cared about background. They respected effort. They respected consistency. They respected showing up and doing the work. One evening, after a long day, another driver handed him a bottle of water without saying much. "Just take it. You look done," he said with a small nod. Ethan accepted it, surprised by how simple the gesture was. No hidden intention, no expectation, just a moment of recognition between two people who understood the same kind of exhaustion. And that moment hit him harder than the cold looks from customers, because it showed him something he had been missing for a long time. Real connection does not always come from comfort. Sometimes it comes from shared struggle, from understanding without words, from respect that is not based on what you have, but on what you do. That night, sitting in his small apartment, no skyline, no glass walls, no silence filled with luxury, just a simple room with basic furniture. Ethan replayed the past weeks in his mind. The way people spoke, the way they looked at him, the way they dismissed him, the way others supported him, without needing anything in return. And slowly, something inside him began to shift. Not just his understanding of people, but his understanding of himself. For years, he believed control was everything. Control over outcomes, control over perception, control over life. But here in this world, control meant nothing. Here, respect had to be earned in a different way, through effort, through patience, through humility. And for the first time, Ethan realized that the life he once believed was complete was missing something fundamental. It was missing perspective. It was missing truth. And now that he had seen both sides, he could not go back to seeing the world the same way again. And that realization was only the beginning of something even more unexpected waiting just ahead. Ethan did not expect to see her again. Not like this. Not in this version of his life. And yet it happened on a normal afternoon. Nothing special. Nothing planned. Just another delivery. Another address. Another door. He pulled up in front of a modern apartment building not too far from downtown. The kind of place that sat between luxury and comfort. Not too expensive, not too simple. Just enough to feel important. He checked the name on the package, paused for half a second, then looked again. Vanessa Blake. He almost smiled. Not out of amusement, but out of recognition. As if the past had found its way back into his present. He picked up the package, walked to the entrance, pressed the buzzer, and waited. A few seconds later, the door clicked open. He stepped inside, took the elevator up, and stood quietly as the numbers changed one by one. When the doors opened, he walked down the hallway and knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was. Vanessa stood there for a moment looking at him, but not seeing him, not recognizing him, not connecting this version of Ethan with the one she used to sit across from. Her eyes moved quickly over his uniform, the package in his hands, his posture. Simple. Neutral. Ordinary. "Yeah," she said without interest. He lifted the box. "Delivery for Vanessa Blake." She nodded, stepped aside slightly and let him in. The apartment looked exactly like her. Polished, controlled, carefully arranged. Everything in place. Everything designed to create a certain impression. Ethan placed the package on the table. She signed quickly, barely looking at him. And for a brief moment he thought that would be it. Just another transaction. Just another passing moment between two strangers. But then she spoke. "You guys are always late," she said casually as she put the pen down. Ethan glanced at the time. He was not late. Still, he said nothing. Just nodded slightly. She walked past him, picked up her phone, scrolling without care. "You know," she added without looking up. "They should really hire better drivers. People who actually know what they are doing." The words landed without weight on the surface, but underneath they carried something familiar. Something he had heard before, just in a different tone, in a different setting. Back then she had smiled at him, leaned closer, spoken softly. Now there was no need for that. Now he had no value to her, no position, no access, no reason to pretend. Ethan turned to leave, his hand already on the door handle. When she spoke again, "Wait," she said quickly. He paused, turned slightly. Not fully, just enough to acknowledge her. She stepped closer this time, actually looking at him for a second. "You don't happen to know anyone hiring, do you?" she asked casually. "I mean, something better than this." She gestured lightly at his uniform. "I am trying to move up, not stay stuck in the same place." Ethan looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, not reacting, not revealing anything. Just observing. The same person, the same voice, the same intention, just without the performance she used to wear around him. No charm, no careful words, no illusion, just direct need, direct expectation. He shook his head slightly. "No," he said simply. She sighed lightly. Clearly uninterested once the answer did not benefit her. "All right then," she said, already turning away. "Thanks." He stepped out of the apartment, the door closing behind him with a soft click, and for a moment he stood there in the hallway, not thinking, not reacting, just feeling the quiet confirmation settle in. This was it. This was the truth without layers, without disguise, without advantage. The same person who once tried to impress him now dismissed him without a second thought. The same voice that once spoke softly, now spoke without care, because there was nothing to gain from him anymore. And strangely, Ethan did not feel anger. He did not feel hurt. He felt clarity, something steady, something undeniable. This was not personal. It was pattern. It was how people adjusted based on what they believed you could give them. And as he walked back down the hallway, into the elevator, and out onto the street, the world around him looked the same but felt different, because now he was not just observing the truth, he was living inside it. And that truth was slowly pushing him toward a point where he would have to decide whether he still believed something real was out there, or if everything he had seen so far was all there was. The clarity Ethan gained did not bring him peace. It brought him closer to something heavier, something harder to accept, because once you begin to see patterns clearly, you also begin to lose the comfort of doubt. And for Ethan, that meant facing a truth he had been trying to avoid for a long time. Day after day, the same experiences repeated. Different faces. Same behavior. Different voices. Same intention. People judged him quickly, dismissed him easily, respected him only when it was required. And even then it felt forced, temporary, conditional. He started to wake up each morning with less curiosity, less hope. The work itself no longer felt like an experiment. It felt like confirmation. Every delivery, every short interaction, every careless word added another layer to the thought forming quietly inside him. Maybe this is just how people are. Maybe there is no version of the world where someone looks at you without measuring what you bring to their life. One evening after a long shift, Ethan sat alone in his apartment. No noise, no city lights, no distractions. Just silence, the kind that makes thoughts louder. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, his body tired, but his mind still moving, replaying faces, voices, moments. Vanessa at the door dismissing him, the woman calling him late, the receptionist ignoring him, the subtle looks, the quiet judgments, the absence of simple respect. And slowly, the question that once pushed him forward began to turn against him. Instead of asking, "Who is actually loving me?" he found himself asking something else. Does it even exist? Is there such a thing as love without condition? Or is it just something people talk about when it sounds good? He let out a quiet breath, running a hand over his face, feeling the weight of that thought settle deeper than he expected, because it felt logical. It felt supported by everything he had seen so far. Not dramatic, not emotional, just consistent with reality as he now understood it. He stood up, walked to the small window of his apartment. The view was nothing like before. No skyline, no endless lights, just a quiet street, a few passing cars, ordinary life moving without noticing him. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan did not feel separate from it. He felt part of it, just another person trying to get through the day without expecting too much from the world. Maybe that was the answer, he thought. Maybe the problem was never the people. Maybe the problem was expectation. Expecting something rare, something pure, something that might not exist in the way he imagined. He rested his hand against the glass, looking out at nothing in particular, and said quietly to himself, "There is no real love, not like I thought, not for someone like me." The words did not feel painful. They felt final, and that was what made them dangerous, because when a man stops believing in something, he stops looking for it. He stops recognizing it, even if it stands right in front of him. And as Ethan turned away from the window that night, carrying that quiet conclusion with him, he did not realize that just beyond that moment, just outside the path he thought he understood, something completely different was about to enter his life and challenge everything he had decided to believe. It did not happen in a dramatic way. No music, no slow motion, no moment that felt designed. It happened quietly, the way real things often do, on a day that looked like every other day. Ethan had already completed most of his deliveries, his body tired, his mind still carrying the weight of the thoughts he had been avoiding. He was walking back to his van when he noticed something small, something easy to miss. An older man standing near the sidewalk, struggling with a grocery bag that had torn at the bottom, items slowly slipping out onto the ground. People walked past. Some glanced briefly. Most did not stop. It was not unusual in the city. Everyone had somewhere to be. Ethan paused for a second, not thinking too much about it. Then stepped forward. He knelt down without saying anything, picking up the items one by one, placing them carefully back into the bag. The older man looked at him surprised, then relieved. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "It's all right," he replied. The man tried to lift the bag again, but it was still too heavy. Ethan took it from him. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Just over there," the man said, pointing down the block. Ethan carried the bag, walking beside him slowly. They did not talk much, just small words, simple directions. But the moment felt different, not because of what was happening, but because of how it felt. Unforced, natural, real. When they reached the building, the man thanked him again, this time with more warmth than before. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Ethan gave a small shrug. "Sometimes you just help," he replied. And that was when he heard a voice behind him, soft but clear. "Not everyone does." He turned slightly and saw her standing there watching the whole time. Amara. She was not dressed to impress. No careful styling, no intention to stand out. Just simple clothes, comfortable shoes, hair pulled back in a way that looked practical, not performative. But there was something in the way she looked at the moment. Not at him, not at his uniform, not at anything. Surface level, she looked at what happened and understood it. "You helped him because you wanted to," she said. Not as a question, just a quiet observation. Ethan nodded slightly. "Yeah," she smiled. Not in a way that tried to charm, just a small, genuine expression. "That's rare," she said. Ethan did not respond immediately. He was not used to being seen for something that simple. Not used to someone noticing intention instead of position. "It was nothing," he said finally. "Just normal." She shook her head lightly. "No, it should be normal." "But it isn't," she replied. Then she looked at him properly for the first time. Not scanning, not measuring, just looking like she was trying to understand who he was, without needing anything from him. "You work around here?" she asked. He nodded. "Delivery." She nodded back. "Makes sense," she said, then added softly, "It's hard work. People don't always treat you right. People don't always." Ethan felt that sentence land differently than everything else he had heard that week, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. She was not pretending. She was not ignoring reality. She saw it and acknowledged it, without turning it into something negative or something to take advantage of. Just truth. "Yeah," he said simply. She gave a small nod, like she understood more than he had said. Well, she added, "I hope your day gets easier from here." Ethan almost smiled, not because of the words, but because of the tone. There was no expectation behind it, no hidden direction. Just a simple wish without a reason to gain anything from it. And for a brief moment he felt something shift. Something he had almost convinced himself no longer existed. A kind of calm. A kind of ease that did not need explanation. "You too," he replied. She stepped back slightly, giving space, not holding the moment, not trying to extend it. And that made it even more real. As she turned to walk away, Ethan watched for a second longer than he expected, not because he was drawn to her in the usual way, but because something about the interaction stayed with him. It was simple, but it was different. No performance, no pressure, no agenda. Just two people in the same moment reacting honestly to what was in front of them. And as he walked back to his van, started the engine, and pulled away, he realized something quietly, but clearly. For the first time since he started this journey, he was not thinking about what was missing. He was thinking about what might still be possible. And that small shift was enough to make him pause just long enough for something new to begin. It did not happen all at once. There was no sudden shift, no dramatic confession, no moment where everything changed in a single breath. It was slower than that, quieter, built through small, repeated moments that on their own seemed simple, but together began to carry weight. The next time Ethan saw Amara, it was not planned. He was delivering again. Same area, same block. And there she was standing outside the same building, talking to someone. He noticed her before she noticed him, not because she stood out, but because something about her presence felt familiar in a way he had not experienced in a long time. She saw him, then recognized him almost immediately and smiled, not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to show she remembered. "You again?" she said lightly. Ethan gave a small nod. "Yeah, same route," he replied. She glanced at the packages in his hand. "Looks like a long day." He shrugged slightly. "Normal." She tilted her head just a little. "You always say that like it is nothing." He paused, then answered. "Because it is." She smiled again, not challenging him, not agreeing, just understanding something in between. That conversation lasted less than a minute, but it stayed with him longer than it should have. The next few days, he found himself noticing the area more, not looking for her directly, but aware of the possibility that he might see her again. And when he did, the conversations came naturally. No effort, no performance. Just small exchanges. "How's your day going?" "Busy." Same as always. They talked about nothing, and somehow it did not feel empty. She told him she worked at a grocery store nearby, long shifts, not great pay, but steady work. He nodded, understanding more than he used to. She asked about his job. He told her enough to be honest without saying too much. Just driving, delivering, staying on schedule. She did not ask what he earned. She did not ask where he lived. She did not ask anything that felt like it had a direction behind it, and that alone made everything feel different. One afternoon, it started to rain. Not heavy, but enough to slow everything down. Ethan had just finished a delivery when he saw her again standing under a small awning, holding a paper bag close to keep it dry. He walked over without thinking. "You going far?" he asked. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Not too far." "Just down the street," she said. He glanced at the bag, then at the rain. "Give me a second." He walked back to his van, grabbed an extra plastic cover, returned and held it out. She hesitated for a moment, then took it carefully. "Thanks," she said. "You did not have to." He shrugged. "Sometimes you just help," he replied. And for a brief second, they both noticed the repetition, the same words from the first day. And this time they both smiled a little more because of it. They walked together for a short distance, not rushing, not filling the silence with unnecessary words, just moving at the same pace, sharing the same space without needing to define it. When they reached her building, she stopped, turned to him. "You are different," she said simply. Ethan looked at her, not defensive, not curious, just waiting. Most people either rush or ignore. She continued, "You do neither. You just show up, do what needs to be done, and leave, like you are not trying to prove anything." He did not answer right away, because the truth was, he had spent years proving things, just not in this version of his life. "Maybe I am just tired," he said finally. She shook her head slightly. "No, I do not think so. I think you just know who you are." That sentence stayed with him long after he left, not because it was perfect, not because it sounded deep, but because it felt real. She was not trying to impress him. She was not trying to gain anything. She was simply describing what she saw. And somehow she saw something he had not even realized was visible. As the days turned into weeks, their conversations grew a little longer. Still simple, still light, but more open. She told him about her family, her younger brother trying to finish school, her mother working 2 jobs. He listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, just present, just hearing her. She asked him about his life not in a way that demanded answers, just curiosity. He kept it simple, honest, without details. I work, I go home, I keep things quiet. She nodded, like that made sense to her. There was no pressure to be more, no expectation to reveal something impressive. And for the first time in years, Ethan did not feel the need to control how he was seen. He did not feel the need to manage the impression he was making. He just existed in the moment. And that was enough. One evening, after a long day, they sat on a bench near the street. Nothing special. Just a place to rest for a few minutes. Cars passed. People moved around them. Life continued as usual. But for that short time, everything felt still. "You ever think about doing something else?" she asked him. Ethan looked ahead, not answering immediately. Sometimes he said, "What about you?" She smiled slightly. "Same." But then she added, "I think no matter what you do, you just have to be a good person doing it. Otherwise, it does not really matter what job you have." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding that more deeply than she knew. Because for him, this was never about the job. It was about truth, about finding something real. And sitting there beside her in that quiet moment, he realized something he had not allowed himself to feel before. Maybe he had not been wrong to look for something real. Maybe he had just been looking in the wrong place. And as that thought settled in quietly, without pressure, without urgency, Ethan found himself not questioning everything for once, but simply allowing something to grow naturally without needing to control where it would go next. It started with a choice, not an accident, not a misunderstanding, but a deliberate step. Ethan knew that if he truly wanted to understand Amara, if he truly wanted to know whether what she showed him was real, then he had to go further than before. He had already removed his wealth, his status, his identity. But there was still something left, something subtle. The sense that he was stable, that he was managing, that he was okay. And so one evening, sitting across from her on that same quiet bench, he decided to take it away. "I lost my job," he said simply. Amara looked at him immediately, not shocked, not dramatic, just focused. "What happened?" she asked. Ethan shrugged lightly. "Company cut drivers, less demand, fewer routes. I was not needed anymore." He kept his tone calm, controlled, the way he always spoke when something mattered. She was quiet for a moment, processing, not judging, not reacting too quickly. That silence alone told him more than words could. "You all right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, I will figure it out," he replied. She studied his face for a second longer, as if trying to see past the words, not doubting him, just understanding the weight behind it. "That is not easy," she said finally. Ethan gave a small breath. "It is what it is, I guess." She did not offer empty comfort. She did not say everything will be fine in that automatic way people often do. Instead, she asked, "What are you going to do next?" He paused. "I do not know yet. Probably look for something else. Maybe warehouse work. Maybe construction. Just something to keep going." She nodded slowly, then said, "Okay. We will figure it out." Ethan noticed the word. It was small, almost invisible, but it stayed with him more than anything else in that moment. The next few days, he made the situation heavier. He stopped mentioning deliveries. He spoke less about work. He allowed the story to settle into something real. He added another layer quietly. I have some debt, he told her a few days later. Nothing big, just enough to make things harder. Amara did not pull away. She did not become distant. She did not start asking questions about what he could offer. Instead, she adjusted in ways that were almost unnoticeable at first. When they met, she started bringing small things. Food. She said she had extra, but Ethan knew it was intentional. One evening, she handed him a small container. "You should eat," she said simply. He looked at it, then at her. "You do not have to do that," she shrugged. "I know, but I want to." There was no pride in it, no performance, no sense that she was sacrificing something huge, just a simple decision to care in the way she could. And that hit Ethan harder than anything else, because he knew what it meant. She was not helping because he could give something back. She was helping because she chose to. Another day when they were walking together, she reached into her bag and handed him a folded bill. It was not much, but it was clearly something she could not easily spare. "Take it," she said. Ethan stopped immediately. "No, I cannot take that," he said. She looked at him, not offended, not embarrassed, just steady. "Yes, you can. You said you have things to figure out. This is part of it." He shook his head again. "Amara, you work too hard for this." She took a small step closer, her voice still calm. "I am not giving you something I cannot afford. I am giving you something I chose to give. There is a difference there." He looked at her, then really looked at her, not as part of the test, not as someone he was observing, but as a person standing in front of him, making a decision without expectation, without calculation, and slowly he took it. Not because he needed the money, but because refusing it would mean refusing the truth of what she was showing him. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded like it was nothing, like it was normal, like this was simply what people did for each other when they cared. And in that moment, something inside Ethan shifted again, deeper this time, because everything he had believed, everything he had started to accept about the world, about people, about love, was now being challenged, not by words, but by action. Real, consistent action. Amara never asked what he would do for her. She never hinted at needing anything. She never turned her care into a transaction. She just showed up again and again in small, steady ways that did not demand recognition. And that was what made it impossible to ignore. By the end of that week, Ethan found himself in a place he had not expected, not questioning whether love existed, but questioning himself. How close he had come to giving up on something real just before it appeared in front of him. And as that thought settled in quietly, he realized this was no longer just a test. This was something else, something that would soon force him to face the truth he had been holding back for too long. Ethan knew he could not continue like this. Not anymore. What started as a test had turned into something real, something that now demanded honesty. Not later, not someday, but now. Because every moment he stayed silent, the truth became heavier. Not just for him, but for her. And one evening, as they sat in their usual place, that same quiet bench where everything between them had slowly grown, he finally decided to say it. Amara was talking about her day, something small, something ordinary. But Ethan was not listening the same way. His mind was steady, but his chest felt tight, like he was about to step into something that could not be undone. Amara noticed. "You are quiet," she said softly. Ethan nodded, just thinking he replied. Then, after a short pause, he added, "I need to tell you something." She turned toward him fully, her expression calm but attentive, not afraid, just ready to listen. That made it harder, not easier. Ethan took a breath, the kind that does not come easily. "I lied to you," he said simply. No long explanation, no soft introduction, just truth. Amara did not react immediately. She did not interrupt him. She just waited, which forced him to continue. "I did not lose my job. he said. I was never just a delivery driver. Not really. Another pause. Heavier this time. I am Ethan Cole, he said quietly, watching her face, not looking away. The name meant nothing for a second, and then it did. Her eyes shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to show recognition. Not just of the name, but of what it carried. The world he came from. The difference between who she thought he was and who he actually was. She leaned back slightly, her silence no longer neutral. Now it held something else. Confusion, maybe. Hurt, maybe. Both. You are serious? She asked. He nodded, yes. She let out a slow breath, looking away for a moment, then back at him again. Why? She asked. Not angry, not loud. Just one word carrying everything. Ethan did not rush the answer, because there was no simple way to say it. I needed to know, he said finally. I needed to know if someone could care about me, without everything that comes with me. Amara held his gaze, and for the first time since they met, there was distance in her eyes. Not rejection, but a space that had not been there before. So you tested me, she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. Not like that. I was trying to protect myself. She looked down at her hands for a second, then back at him again. You let me believe you were struggling. You let me give you money. You let me worry about you. Her voice did not rise, but the weight in it was undeniable. Ethan nodded. Yes, I did. And I am sorry. There was no defense in his tone, no attempt to justify, just truth and regret. Amara stood up slowly, not walking away, just needing space to think, to feel, to process this new reality that had just replaced everything she thought she understood about him. Ethan remained seated, not following her, not trying to control the moment, because this was no longer his to manage. After a few seconds, she spoke again without turning back. You should have trusted me enough to be honest. From the beginning, she said. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. You are right, he replied quietly. She turned back to face him, now her expression clearer. Still hurt, but steady. I do not care about your money, she said. I never did. Ethan felt that more than anything else, because he knew it was true. That was the one thing he had already learned the hard way. But you lied, she continued, and that matters more than anything else. He nodded slowly. I know. Amara was silent again, then took a small step closer. Not as close as before, but not distant either. I need time, she said simply. Ethan nodded. You can take all the time you need, he replied. She studied him for one last moment, then gave a small nod. Not cold, not warm, just real, and turned to leave, leaving him alone on that bench with the truth finally spoken, but not yet forgiven. And as he sat there, watching her walk away, Ethan understood something clearly for the first time. This was the real test, not of her love, but of his honesty. And whether what they had built could survive the weight of the truth he had kept hidden for too long. Ethan knew this moment would come. He had delayed it as long as he could. But now that the truth was out, now that Amara knew who he really was, there was no way to keep the two worlds separate anymore. And so one evening, after days of thinking, he made the decision to bring her into the part of his life he had once hidden. Not to show off, not to prove anything, but because if what they had was real, it could not stay in the shadows. Amara did not seem impressed when he told her where they were going. She was quiet, more thoughtful than curious, not intimidated, but aware that she was stepping into something unfamiliar. When they arrived at the Cole residence, the difference was impossible to ignore. The size, the space, the silence that came from wealth, not peace. Everything about the place spoke without words. Amara walked beside him, steady, not shrinking, not pretending, just present. And that alone made Ethan respect her even more. As they stepped inside the house, staff moved quietly, acknowledging Ethan with subtle nods. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, but enough to show his position. Amara noticed everything, but said nothing. They were led into a large living room, where his parents were already waiting. Richard Cole sat upright, composed, controlled, the kind of man who measured people before they spoke. Margaret Cole beside him, elegant, calm, her expression harder to read. Ethan stepped forward. "This is Amara," he said simply, not adding titles, not explaining her background, just her name. Because that was how he saw her. Amara nodded politely. "Nice to meet you," she said, her voice steady. Margaret gave a small, polite smile. Richard did not smile. He studied her instead. The silence stretched just a little too long before he finally spoke. "And what do you do?" Amara answered honestly. "I work at a grocery store." He nodded once, not impressed, not surprised, just confirming something in his mind. "I see," he said quietly. Then his eyes shifted back to Ethan, not to include her, but to address him directly. "When were you planning to tell us about this?" Ethan remained calm. "I'm telling you now," he replied. Richard leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged. "You understand what this looks like," he said, not raising his voice but making every word clear. Ethan held his gaze. "I understand exactly what it is." Margaret finally spoke, her tone softer, but no less firm. "Ethan, we are not questioning your feelings," she said carefully. "But relationships require more than feelings. They require compatibility, stability, understanding of the life you are part of." Amara listened without interrupting, without reacting emotionally. She did not defend herself. She did not argue. She simply stood there, absorbing every word. Ethan glanced at her briefly, then back at his parents. "She understands me," he said. "That is enough." Richard let out a quiet breath, almost like a restrained sigh. "No, Ethan," he said. "That is not enough." He paused, then added more directly. "She does not belong to this world." The words landed heavier than anything else. Not shouted, not aggressive, but firm. Final. Amara felt it. Ethan felt it. Even Margaret shifted slightly at how clear it sounded. Ethan straightened his posture slightly, not defensive, but grounded. "She does not need to belong to your world," he said. "She just needs to belong with me." Richard looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "You are not thinking clearly," he said. "You are reacting to something emotional, temporary. You will regret building your future on something that cannot sustain itself." Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not argue loudly. He simply stood there and answered calmly. "You built everything on logic," he said. "I understand that, but not everything in life is meant to be calculated." Margaret stepped in again, trying to soften the tension. "Ethan, no one is saying she is not a good person," she said. "But this is bigger than that. You live in different realities. Your responsibilities, your expectations, your environment. All of it matters." Amara finally spoke then. Not to defend, not to fight. Just to be clear. "I did not come here to take anything," she said quietly. "I did not ask for his world, and I do not need it." The room went still for a moment because what she said was simple, but it carried weight. She was not trying to prove she was worthy. She was stating that she did not measure herself by their standards, and that made her stronger than they expected. Richard looked at her again, this time with a different kind of attention. Not acceptance, but recognition of her firmness. "That may be true," he said, "but it does not change reality." Ethan stepped forward slightly enough to show where he stood. "Reality is what we decide to build," he said, "not what we inherit." The tension in the room did not explode. It settled into something colder, something more controlled. something that would not be resolved in one conversation. Margaret looked at Ethan, then at Amara, and spoke one final time. "We are not agreeing to this," she said calmly, "and we will not support it." Ethan nodded slowly. He had expected that. "I am not asking for permission," he replied. "Just honesty." And with that, he turned slightly toward Amara, his voice softer. "We can go." She nodded once, and together they walked out of the room. Not rushed, not defeated. Just clear about where they stood, and as they stepped out of the house into the quiet night air, Ethan knew something had shifted permanently. Not just between him and his parents, but in the path ahead. Because now he would have to choose not just what he believed, but what he was willing to give up for it. And that choice was closer than ever. The decision did not come with anger. It did not come with shouting or breaking things. It came quietly the way real decisions do. The kind that form slowly and then suddenly feel unavoidable. After that night at his parents' house, Ethan did not argue again. He did not try to convince them. He already understood something important. They were not going to change. Not now. Maybe not ever. And the question was no longer whether they approved. The question was whether he was willing to live his life based on their approval or his own truth. The next morning, he returned to the house alone. The same space that once felt like control now felt distant, almost unfamiliar. He walked through the rooms slowly. The living room, the office, the hallway lined with framed achievements, moments that used to define him. Now they looked like pieces of someone else's life, something he had built, but no longer needed. He stopped in front of the large window looking out over the city, the same view that once made him feel powerful. Now it felt quiet, almost empty. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. He took a slow breath and said it out loud. Not to anyone, just to himself. "I am done." Later that day, he sat across from his parents again, this time calm, clear. No hesitation. Richard spoke first. "I assume you have reconsidered," he said. Ethan shook his head. "No, I have decided." Margaret looked at him carefully. "Decided what?" Ethan met their eyes and answered simply, "I am leaving. Not for a few days. Not to think. Not to negotiate. I am stepping away from everything. The business, the house, the structure. All of it." Richard's expression did not change, but his tone hardened. "You are making a mistake." Ethan remained steady, maybe, "but it will be mine." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "You do not have to do this," she said. "You can keep your life and still care about her." Ethan shook his head slowly. "That is not how this works. I cannot say I believe in something real and then stay in a life built on conditions." There was silence for a moment. Not loud, not emotional, just heavy. Richard finally spoke again. "If you walk away from this, you do not come back to it. Not like before." Ethan nodded. "I understand." Margaret's eyes softened just slightly. "This is not just about you," she said. "This affects everything. The company, the people depending on you." Ethan did not look away. "I have already arranged everything," he said. "Management is in place. Operations will continue. I am not destroying anything. I am just removing myself." Richard studied him for a long moment, then asked one final question. "Is she worth all of this?" Ethan paused, not because he doubted, but because the answer mattered more than anything else. "Yes," he said quietly, but clearly. "Not just her. What she represents. What is real." Richard leaned back slightly, his decision already clear. "Then you have made your choice." Ethan stood up, not in defiance, not in anger, just final. "I have," he said. And without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, out of the life he had known for years. This time, not as a test, not as an experiment, but as a real decision. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. Amara was waiting a few blocks away where they agreed to meet when she saw him. She did not ask what happened. She looked at him and understood. "You did it," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "I did?" She stepped closer. Not dramatic, not emotional, just present. "Are you sure?" He looked at her for a moment, then answered, "I have never been more sure in my life." She did not smile widely. She did not celebrate. She simply reached for his hand and held it. That was enough. No promises, no guarantees, just two people standing in the same place, choosing each other without knowing exactly what would come next. And that was what made it real. Over the next few days, Ethan moved into a small apartment. Nothing impressive. Nothing designed to impress anyone. Just a place to live. A place to start over. He kept things simple. Basic furniture. Minimal space. No unnecessary comfort. And for the first time in years, everything he had around him was there because he chose it, not because it reflected status, not because it signaled success, just because it was enough. The work returned too, not as a disguise this time, but as reality. He went back to the same kind of job, the same kind of effort, but now there was no safety net, no hidden identity, no control behind the scenes, just him, his time, his energy, his decisions. And as the days began to settle into a new rhythm, Ethan understood something deeply. This was no longer about finding out who loved him. This was about becoming someone capable of living without needing to question it. And as that understanding settled quietly into his life, he did not realize yet that the hardest part of this journey was still ahead. Not the choice to leave, but the weight of everything that comes after. At first it felt manageable. Not easy, but manageable. The kind of struggle you believe you can handle because you chose it. Ethan woke up early, worked long hours, came home tired but steady. He told himself this was real. This was what he wanted. A life without illusion, without protection. Just effort and truth. And for a while that belief held him together. But reality does not stay quiet for long, especially when money becomes tight. Bills started to stack. Not all at once, but slowly. Rent, utilities, food, transportation. Each small cost adding weight to every decision. Ethan tracked everything carefully, cutting anything unnecessary, living with discipline. But even discipline has limits when income stays low and expenses do not disappear. One evening, he sat at the small table in his apartment going through numbers again and again, trying to stretch what he had. Just a little further, knowing it would not be enough. Not for long. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Not defeated, but aware this was different from anything he had faced before, because this time there was no backup, no hidden solution, no account to fall back on. This was real pressure, the kind that does not disappear when you stop thinking about it. Amara felt it too even before he said anything. She saw the changes, the way he hesitated before spending, the way he stayed quiet a little longer, the way his energy dropped after long days. She did not ask directly at first. She just paid attention. One night when they sat together eating something simple, she finally spoke. "You do not have to pretend with me," she said softly. Ethan looked at her. "I am not pretending," he replied. She shook her head slightly, not in disagreement, just in understanding. "You are trying to carry everything alone." He did not respond immediately because she was not wrong, and that made it harder to answer. "I just do not want this to become something that weighs on you," he said finally. Amara looked at him steadily. "It already does," she replied. "Not because of the situation, but because you think you have to handle it without me." There was no accusation in her voice, just honesty. And that honesty made the moment heavier than any argument could have. Ethan nodded slowly. "I am trying to figure things out," he said. She reached into her bag again, something he had begun to recognize. and pulled out a small envelope. He looked at it, then at her. "No," he said immediately. "Amara, I told you before, I cannot keep taking from you." She placed it on the table anyway. "This is not about you taking," she said. "It is about us getting through this." Ethan shook his head more firmly. "You already do too much." She leaned forward slightly, her voice still calm but stronger. "This is not too much. This is what people do when they care. They don't calculate who gives more. They just show up." Ethan looked at her, struggling not with pride, but with something deeper. Something that came from years of being in control of everything. "I do not want you to feel like you have to fix my problems," he said. Amara exhaled softly. "I am not fixing anything," she replied. "I am standing with you. There is a difference." The words stayed between them for a moment longer than expected, because they touched something real, something neither of them could ignore. But the pressure did not stop there. As days passed, it grew in quiet ways. Meals became simpler. Plans became limited. Small decisions carried more weight than before, and slowly something else began to form. Not from Ethan, but from Amara. A quiet feeling she did not say at first, but felt deeply. Guilt. She watched him work harder, struggle more, carry burdens he never had before. And in her mind, a thought began to repeat. If not for me, he would not be here. If not for me, he would still have everything. One night, she finally said it. "You should not have left everything." She spoke softly, almost like she was talking to herself, but Ethan heard her clearly. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then continued. "You had a life, security, comfort, everything. And now you are dealing with all this because of me." Ethan leaned forward immediately. "No," he said firmly. "Do not say that. This was my choice, not yours." She shook her head. "But I am the reason," he interrupted gently but clearly. "You are the reason I see things differently, not the reason I struggle. There is a difference." Amara looked down. Not fully convinced, because guilt does not disappear, just because someone explains it away. It stays. It settles quietly in the background and changes how you see, I suppose, every situation. Ethan reached for her hand. "You did not take anything from me," he said. "You helped me understand what matters." And even though his words were true, the pressure around them did not fade. It stayed present in every bill, every decision, every moment of uncertainty. And as both of them sat there, holding on to each other, while carrying their own silent worries, neither of them realized yet that the next challenge waiting ahead would not just test their strength, but push everything they believed about love to its limit. The change did not arrive with warning. It came quietly hidden inside something that at first felt like hope. A small moment, a delayed sentence, a look that stayed a little longer than usual. One evening, Amara sat across from Ethan holding a cup of tea she had barely touched, her hands still, her eyes not quite meeting his. Ethan noticed it immediately. "You are quiet," he said softly. She gave a small nod, then looked down for a moment before speaking. "I need to tell you something." Her voice was calm, but there was something under it, something fragile. Something trying to stay steady. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What is it?" She hesitated, then said, "I went to the clinic today." He felt his chest tighten just a little. "Why?" She looked up this time, and there it was. Not fear, not panic, but something deeper, something real. "I am pregnant." The words did not rush. They landed slowly but heavily in the space between them. Ethan did not speak right away. Not because he did not understand, but because he did. The meaning, the weight, the responsibility. It all arrived at once. He exhaled quietly, then asked, "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes, I checked twice." Silence filled the room. But it was not empty. It was full of something new, something neither of them had planned, but both now had to face. Ethan stood up slowly, not pacing, not reacting wildly, just moving because staying still felt too small for what he was feeling. He turned back to her and asked, "Are you okay?" Amara nodded at first, but then shook her head slightly. "I do not know." She placed a hand on her stomach, almost unconsciously. "I did not expect this. Not now. Not like this." Ethan walked closer and sat beside her, not speaking immediately, just being there. And in that moment, something shifted again. Not about love, not about testing, not about truth, but about responsibility. Real, unavoidable responsibility. "We will figure this out," he said quietly, not as a promise, but as a decision. Amara looked at him, searching his face for doubt, but found none. Only calm. Only presence. Only the same steady man she had come to trust over time. But life rarely brings one challenge at a time, and within days, something else began to change. Amara started feeling weak. At first it was small, dizziness, a lack of energy, something she tried to ignore because there was no space in her life for weakness. She still worked, still moved, still tried to keep everything normal. But Ethan saw it. "You need to rest," he said more than once. "I am fine," she replied every time. But she was nothing. One afternoon while at work, she felt the world tilt slightly, the sound around her fading just enough to make her grip the counter to stay steady. A coworker noticed. "You okay?" She nodded, but her voice did not match. "I just need a minute," she said. Ethan picked her up that evening and saw it immediately. The way she walked slower, the way her face had lost color. "We are going to the doctor," he said. "No, I do not want to spend money on that," she answered quickly. Ethan did not argue loudly. He just looked at her and said softly, "This is not something we ignore." They went. The clinic was simple, nothing like the private spaces Ethan once knew, but it was real, and it was enough. After waiting longer than expected, after answering questions, after quiet moments filled with uncertainty, the doctor finally spoke. "You are pregnant, yes, but your body is under stress," he said. "Too much stress. Your condition is not stable right now." Amara listened carefully. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means you need rest, proper nutrition, less pressure, or this could become dangerous." The word dangerous did not echo loudly, but it stayed with them both. Ethan felt it settle in his chest deeper than anything before. This was not about money anymore, not about pride, not about proving something. This was about life, about her, about the child. Amara sat still, absorbing everything, not crying, not reacting loudly, just holding it inside as she always did. But Ethan knew her well enough now to see what she was not saying. "This is too much," she whispered later when they were alone. "Not just the baby. Everything. The stress. The situation. You gave up everything and now this thing." Ethan shook his head immediately. "No, do not turn this into something negative. This is not a problem. This is our child." She looked at him. "But what about you? What about your life?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "This is my life now, and I am not walking away from it." But the truth was the pressure had changed shape. It was no longer just financial. It was physical, emotional, urgent. The stakes were higher than before, because now it was not just about them. It was about something fragile growing inside a situation already under strain. And as Ethan sat beside Amara that night, watching her try to stay strong while carrying more than she should, he understood something clearly. This was no longer a test of love. This was the moment where love had to become responsibility, sacrifice, action, and strength all at once. And whether they were ready or not, the next step would decide everything that came after. The night felt heavier than usual. Not because anything loud had happened, but because something quiet was changing. Amara lay on the small couch, her body still, her breathing slower than normal. Ethan sat nearby watching her, not speaking, not moving much, just paying attention in the way people do when they are afraid to miss something important. She had been weaker for days, but this time it felt different. She was not just tired. She looked drained, like her body was carrying more than it could hold. Ethan leaned closer. Amara, you need to eat something. She shook her head lightly. I am not hungry. He frowned. That is not good. You need strength. She did not argue. She just closed her eyes for a moment, as if even speaking required effort. Ethan stood up, walked to the kitchen area, and brought back a glass of water and a small plate. Just try a little, he said softly. She tried to sit up, but halfway through she stopped, her hand pressing lightly against her stomach. Ethan moved quickly, supporting her slowly. Easy, he said. His voice calm, but tighter now. Something was wrong, he could feel it. Not as a thought, but as a quiet alarm inside his chest. Amara breathed in slowly. Then suddenly her face changed. Not panic, not fear, but pain. Real, sharp pain. Ethan saw it and did not hesitate. We are going to the hospital now. She shook her head weakly. No, we cannot afford that. Ethan looked at her firmly. This is not about money anymore. This is about you and the baby. She did not argue again, because the pain was already stronger than her resistance. Within minutes, they were outside, Ethan helping her into a car. His movements fast but controlled. His mind clear in a way it had not been in a long time. Fear can do that. It removes hesitation. It removes doubt. It leaves only action. The hospital was not far, but the drive felt longer than it was. Every second stretched by the sound of her breathing beside him. He kept his voice steady. You are okay. We are almost there. Just stay with me. Amara did not respond fully. She just held his hand weakly, and that alone pushed him harder. When they arrived, everything moved quickly. Nurses, questions, forms, lights, voices overlapping. Ethan answered what he could, stayed close when they allowed it, and stepped back only when they asked him to wait outside. And then there was silence, the kind that feels louder than noise. He sat alone in the hallway, his hands locked together, his head lowered, not praying, not thinking, just waiting. Time slowed down, not measured by minutes, but by uncertainty. And then, something unexpected happened. A voice he had not heard in weeks, Ethan. He looked up immediately. Margaret stood at the end of the hallway, her expression not cold, not distant, but worried. Real worried. What are you doing here? He asked. She walked closer. I called your old office, she said. They told me everything. I had to see for myself. He did not argue. He did not question why she came, because in that moment none of it mattered. Amara is inside, he said quietly. She is not well. Margaret looked at him, then at the door, then back at him. Without another word, she walked toward the nurse station, spoke quickly, calmly in a tone Ethan recognized, the tone of someone used to being heard. Within minutes, things changed. Doctors moved faster. Questions were answered more clearly. Arrangements made without delay. Ethan watched it happen, not with pride, not with relief alone, but with realization. Sometimes help is not about power. It is about timing, about showing up when it matters most. Margaret returned to him. She will be taken care of, she said firmly. He nodded. Thank you. She looked at him closely. This is serious, Ethan. He swallowed. I know. Hours passed before anyone came out. The doctor approached, his face professional, but not cold. Mr. Cole, he said. The situation was critical, but we stabilized her. The baby is still okay, but she needs proper care. No more stress. No more delay. Ethan felt the words settle deep, deeper than anything else before. This was real. This was his child. Not an idea, not a possibility, but real. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. Steady now. Clear. Thank you, he said quietly. When he was finally allowed to see her, Amara was resting, her face pale but calm. He walked to her side slowly, sat down, and took her hand. I am here, he said softly. She opened her eyes slightly. You stayed. He nodded, always. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not money, not pride, not the past. Only the truth that had finally become clear to him. This was his family, and he was not going to lose it. And as he sat there holding her hand, feeling the quiet weight of everything that had just happened, he knew the next step would not just change his life. It would define who he truly was. From this moment forward, time passed. Not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. Amara recovered slowly, her strength returning day by day. The baby growing safely this time under proper care. Ethan stayed beside her through everything, not as a man trying to prove something, but as a man who had finally found where he belonged. Margaret returned more often, at first quietly checking on Amara, then staying longer, bringing food, arranging care, doing things she once believed were beneath her, not because she changed overnight, but because reality had shown her something she could not ignore. Respect is not about status. It is about how you treat people when they have nothing to offer you. Richard did not come at first, but one day he did. He stood at the door, silent for a moment before stepping inside. His eyes moved slowly around the small apartment, then rested on Amara, and finally on Ethan. No speech, no apology, just a quiet nod. And in that moment it was enough. Ethan understood some changes do not need words. They need time and truth. And as he stood there, holding Amara's hand, feeling their child future growing between them, he knew he had not lost everything. He had finally found what mattered most, and that was something no money could ever replace.